You ever look at a world map and just wonder, why are the borders drawn like that? Or why do people in completely different parts of the world speak the same language? Well, the answer, almost always, comes down to one word: empire. These massive systems of power aren't just something out of a history book. They are the architectural blueprints of the world we live in today. So let's unpack how these structures were built and why their ghosts are still walking around. When you boil it all down, the engine of every empire has always run on three things: the raw quest for power over others, the relentless strive for expansion into new lands, and the absolute need for control to hold the whole thing together. That simple formula, that's the fundamental DNA of every single empire that has ever existed. So, here's how we're going to break it all down in this explainer. First, we'll get a clear definition of what an empire actually is. Then, we'll journey way back to see how the very first empires got started. We'll dig into the toolkit they used to stay in charge, see what happened the moment they went global, and finally, we'll connect all those dots to the world you and I are living in right now.
All right, so let's start with the big one. What exactly are we talking about when we use the word empire? What makes it different from just a really, really big country?
See, an empire isn't just about being big. It's a specific kind of political system. You have one central power, a core state, calling the shots for a bunch of different territories and peoples who, often don't have much of a say in the matter. This control is usually built on three pillars: military force to conquer, a smart administration to govern, and economic dominance to get rich. And this model of power is ancient. I mean, truly ancient. The first empires didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They grew from a very specific recipe of environmental and social ingredients that gave a few early societies a huge head start. Just look at this timeline. We're going back 5,000 years here. In the incredibly fertile lands of Mesopotamia and Egypt, ambitious rulers started thinking way beyond their own city walls. Empires like the Akkadian and the Babylonian weren't just beating their neighbors. They were creating the very first instruction manual for large-scale, centralized control, a blueprint that would be copied for millennia to come. So, what was the secret sauce for building one of these early empires? It all started with food. Seriously. These fertile river valleys like the Tigris and the Nile allowed them to grow a surplus of crops. And if you control the food supply, you can support a large population and, most importantly, a professional army. That agricultural power became the engine of conquest, letting rulers stitch together scattered cities into the world's first true empires. Now, conquering territory with an army is one thing, but holding on to it for centuries, that's a whole different ballgame. To do that, empires needed more than just soldiers. They needed a sophisticated operating system. And you can actually watch this imperial operating system get better over time. The Persians, for example, were masters of infrastructure, building a massive network of roads to move troops and information at incredible speeds. Then the Romans came along and perfected the software of empire. They created universal legal code to govern everyone from Britain to Syria. And in a genius move, they offered the prize of citizenship, which gave conquered peoples a reason to actually buy into the whole Roman project. Ultimately, it's the boring stuff that really acts as the glue for an empire: standardized laws, efficient tax collection, physical infrastructure like roads and aqueducts. These are the systems that truly bind vast, diverse territories into a single, functional state. And of course, let's be honest, it was all about the money. Empires were designed to be massive economic machines. As you can kind of see here, their whole purpose was to funnel wealth through resources they took, taxes they collected, and trade routes they controlled, from the outer territories right back to the imperial core. That constant flow of cash is what paid for the armies, the monuments, and the entire imperial project. But control wasn't just about force and finance. The most successful empires mastered soft power. They spread their religion, their language, their philosophy, their culture. Now, this could unify a diverse population under a shared identity, or it could be used to justify their rule as a civilizing mission. An idea can often travel further and last a lot longer than an army. For thousands of years, the great empires were land-based. Their power was measured by how many soldiers and horsemen they had. But then, a revolutionary shift in technology came along and changed the very nature of empire forever. This slide captures that shift perfectly. On the left, you've got the old model, the Mongol Empire, a masterpiece of cavalry that dominated the overland Silk Road. On the right, the new model, European maritime empires. Their power didn't come from horses. It came from ocean-going ships, advanced navigation, and gunpowder.
This technology allowed them to project power across the globe, building colonial empires thousands of miles from home. But there is a fundamental rule of history. Power is never permanent. It doesn't matter if you're a land empire or a sea empire, they all eventually face the same fate. They overextend their reach, the costs of maintaining control become way too high, and the people they rule inevitably resist. Every single empire in history has eventually crumbled.
Which brings us to our final and maybe most important section. Why does any of this ancient history matter today? Because we are living inside the house that empires built. Their legacy is everywhere. The fingerprints of empire are all over our modern world. The borders of many nations in Africa and Asia were drawn up by colonial administrators in Europe. The languages we speak, English, Spanish, French, follow the old imperial trade routes. And so many of today's conflicts, and even our globalized economy, have their roots in the policies and networks established centuries ago. This chart shows one of the starkest legacies. If you map the patterns of global wealth today, they align remarkably well with the old colonial relationships. The economic systems established during the Age of Empire, which were designed to enrich the colonial powers, created these deep-seated inequalities that persist to this day. And that's really the key takeaway here. The history of empires isn't just a story about the past. It's an essential framework for understanding the power dynamics, the cultural connections, and the economic inequalities that define the world we live in right now. And that leaves us with a final thought. This pattern of power, expansion, and control has defined human history for 5 millennia. So as we look to the future, we have to ask, what does empire look like now? Are they nations? Are they global corporations? Are they digital platforms? Because one thing is certain, power is still shaping our world.